Hey guys, this is CJ and Julien for Invictus Athlete. And today we want to talk about some internal, external rotation torque stuff. And really, Kelly Starrett brought this to everybody's attention. Started talking about squatting, right? And he started talking about creating torque through external rotation coming up out of the bottom of a squat. And what we saw in the CrossFit community was this reaction to it, and everybody was kind of keyed into it, but sometimes misinterpreting. And they were really going knees out with the foot moving, right? Which may have misunderstood. And Kelly quickly reminded everybody that misunderstands torque, that we can't have torque if the foot moves. So if you would just explain that kind of concept of anchor point in torque real quick.
The idea was like that this structure is stronger than this one. So the idea was to create rotation at the hip while the feet stays still, creating the torque. What was misunderstood is by letting the foot move as I crank, then I get displacement, but I lose the torque, right? The point is that the foot stays still and I crank here and I get the structure that I want. If the foot moves, I lose everything. And that's what knees out became the problem that it became, because instead of torquing right here, they ended up letting the feet move as well. And that is not torque anymore. That is something else that becomes an abduction. So the idea was to stay here and torque, creating tension here, not letting the knees come out and the feet moving, which loses all the power, basically.
Yeah, which is awesome. And I think the community has hopefully come along with that and heard Kelly's message that's not creating
That's
torque.
not what knees out was.
But the one thing that we haven't, with that understanding of torque, the one thing we haven't really talked about is that's external rotation to create torque. When are we actually creating torque through internal rotation?
Yeah, there are certain patterns that you see where external rotation is not the key. Like you will never sprint in external rotation. That is not the proper pattern. So we have all those hinging patterns that are, so on one side you have the squat, which is the pattern, and on the other side you have the hinge. The hinge is not a squat. I know it sounds obvious when we say it, but the pattern is completely different. For example, a pure hinge would be the sprint. And you cannot sprint in an external rotation way. Like you will never load for a broad jump externally rotated. That is not the kind of torque that you're requiring. The difference would be like, for example, as we see on the punch, to explain the torque correctly, that would be external rotation, right? This outside of Kung Fu movies, that is not how you would create torque. You would create torque through internal rotation, which is why you see the foot moving the hand moving like this in boxing or martial arts and everything. It's because we're trying to create torque through internal rotation. Same thing on the kick. You don't see people abducting on the kick. You actually see internal rotation. That's where the torque, the power comes from, is that internal rotation. So there are certain movements that require torque through external rotation, certain movements like the hinge that require torque through internal rotation.
So for the average CrossFitter, what does that mean in terms of lifting? What would be a good example?
Lifting is a part where we don't see a lot of internal rotation. Would be like, for example, the deadlift, the barbell rows. A barbell rows, you're supposed to place yourself in a hinge, right? So which means no bending at the leg, just in this position right here. All those positions that are pure hinge, we have the barbell rows, we have the stiff leg deadlift, we have the pure deadlift. All those are hinge movement. And those positions do not require torquing through external rotation, rather through internal rotation.
Right. So explain then how we might set up and what that does. I mean, when I first tried this, the amount of engagement that I got through the hamstrings was really noticeable instantly.
Exactly.
So maybe talk us through the setup in that hinge.
So it will be the same idea, which will be like I would set up, so you can see through the knees, in this position, and torque throughout internal rotation, and that's it, right? We are not talking again about losing the connection from the feet to the ground. We are talking about just torquing through internal rotation. I can still have my knees perfectly in line with the feet, creating a tremendous tension. And right now, I can feel a tremendous tension in my hammies from here. If I go in this position, the tension goes somewhere else, but I lose all this. By cranking here, I create I wound up my hammies tremendously here, which is obviously the muscle group you want to engage on a hinge.
For that first pull off the ground, certainly
For example,
we want that
yes.
on the deadlift. So Again, we're not saying knees in. We're going to avoid that that mistake.
It's the same idea as the knees out for the squat. So remember, like losing the feet lose all the tension here. So it'll be the same thing. If I end up doing this, my feet are moving, I'm losing the torque. It is the same idea of having my feet planted into the ground, cranking here, never letting the knees come in, because then my feet come off the ground and I lost all the power.
Yeah. So we'll shoot some demos of that with some athletes, but I want you guys to play with that a little bit. Just start grabbing the ground, start creating some internal rotation and hinging at the hips, and see how that feels through the hamstrings or posterior chain.
And try to set up in a hinge and then externally rotate a bit. Go back to internal rotation, go back to external rotation, and you will see a tremendous difference in the hamstring involvement in the two different torques.
Cool.